Lesson 71. Only God's plan for salvation will work. You may not realize that the ego has set up a plan for salvation in opposition to God's. It is this plan in which you believe. Since it is the opposite of God's, you also believe that to accept God's plan in place of the ego's is to be damned. This sounds preposterous, of course. Yet after we have considered just what the ego's plan is, perhaps you will realize that, however preposterous it may be, you do believe in it. The ego's plan for salvation centers around holding grievances. It maintains that, if someone else spoke or acted differently, if some external circumstance or event were changed, you would be saved. Thus, the source of salvation is constantly perceived as outside yourself. Each grievance you hold is a declaration, and an assertion in which you believe, that says, if this were different, I would be saved. The change of mind necessary for salvation is thus demanded of everyone and everything except yourself. The role assigned to your own mind in this plan, then, is simply to determine what, other than itself, must change if you are to be saved. According to this insane plan, any perceived source of salvation is acceptable provided that it will not work. This ensures that the fruitless search will continue, for the illusion persists that although this hope has always failed, there is still grounds for hope in other places and in other things. Another person will yet serve better. Another situation will yet offer success. Such is the ego's plan for your salvation. Surely you can see how it is in strict accord with the ego's basic doctrine, seek but do not find. For what could more surely guarantee that you will not find salvation than to channelize all your efforts in searching for it where it is not? God's plan for salvation works simply because by following His direction you seek for salvation where it is. But if you are to succeed, as God promises you will, you must be willing to seek there only. Otherwise, your purpose is divided, and you will attempt to follow two plans for salvation that are diametrically opposed in all ways. The result can only bring confusion, misery, and a deep sense of failure and despair. How can you escape all this? Very simply, the idea for today is the answer. Only God's plan for salvation will work. There can be no real conflict about this, because there is no possible alternative to God's plan that will save you. His is the only plan that is certain in its outcome. His is the only plan that must succeed. Let us practice recognizing this certainty today, and let us rejoice that there is an answer to what seems to be a conflict with no resolution possible. All things are possible to God. Salvation must be yours because of His plan, which cannot fail. Begin the 2 longer practice periods for today by thinking about today's idea and realizing that it contains 2 parts, each making equal contribution to the whole. God's plan for your salvation will work and other plans will not. Do not allow yourself to become depressed or angry at the second part. It is inherent in the first. And in the first is your full release from all your own insane attempts and mad proposals to free yourself. They have led to depression and anger, but God's plan will succeed. It will lead to release and joy. Remembering this, let us devote the remainder of the extended practice periods to asking God to reveal His plan to us. Ask Him very specifically, what would you have me do? Where would you have me go? What would you have me say? And to whom? Give Him full charge of the rest of the practice period, and let Him tell you what needs to be done by you in His plan for your salvation. He will answer in proportion to your willingness to hear His voice. Refuse not to hear. The very fact that you are doing the exercises proves that you have some willingness to listen. This is enough to establish your claim to God's answer. In the shorter practice periods, tell yourself often that God's plan for salvation, and only His, will work. Be alert to all temptation to hold grievances today and respond to them with this form of today's idea. Holding grievances is the opposite of God's plan for salvation, and only His plan will work. Try to remember today's idea some 6 or 7 times an hour. There could be no better way to spend a half minute or less than to remember the source of your salvation and to see it where it is. Lesson 71. Only God's plan for salvation will work. The great deception and the way out. So let me get this straight. I've spent my whole life climbing a ladder, strategizing, problem-solving, and trying to control my way into happiness, only to find out that the ladder doesn't even go anywhere. And now you're telling me that the real solution, the only plan that actually works, was available to me the entire time, and I just ignored it. That's interesting. Real interesting. The ego's plan, a house of mirrors with no exit. Imagine you walk into a carnival funhouse filled with mirrors. At first, it's amusing. Your reflection stretches, distorts, bends. You laugh at the absurdity. But then you try to leave and suddenly, you can't. Everywhere you turn, there's another false exit. Another promise of salvation that turns out to be nothing more than another warped reflection of your own confusion. You see a door labeled success. You rush toward it, believing this will be the way out. You step through, only to find yourself still in the funhouse, just in a different section. You try another exit. Love. Surely if you find the right person, they'll lead you out. You follow that path, and once again you're back where you started. Another door appears. Spiritual enlightenment. You think, this is the real way out. You sit in meditation, you chant, you study, you practice. And yet somehow you're still in the funhouse. No matter where you go, no matter how promising the exit appears, you always end up right back in the same illusion. This is the ego's plan. It keeps you seeking but never finding. It keeps dangling salvation just out of reach, always convincing you that the next thing, the next achievement, the next relationship, the next self-improvement plan will be the one that finally saves you. But it never does. Because it was never designed to. The ego's game is rigged. The preposterous belief, to accept God's plan, is to be damned. Now, the Course makes a claim that seems so outrageous, we almost want to dismiss it. You believe that to accept God's plan in place of the ego's is to be damned. At first glance, that sounds insane. Who would actually believe that? But let's take a step back. Look at the moments when you've resisted surrendering to love, to peace, to the simplicity of truth. Have you ever felt that trusting life meant losing control? Have you ever resisted forgiving someone because it felt like letting them off the hook? Have you ever feared that if you stopped striving, you would become lazy, unimportant, or unworthy? Deep down, the ego whispers, if you let go of your plan, you'll lose something essential. You'll lose yourself. And so, we cling. We keep playing the same rigged game, terrified that if we stop, if we step away from the table, something terrible will happen. But what actually happens when we stop playing? Nothing bad, just freedom. The ego's madness. Change everything but yourself. The Course says that, under the ego's plan, your mind's role is to figure out what outside of yourself must change in order for you to be saved. If only my partner changed, then I could be happy. If only my job changed, then I'd be fulfilled. If only my past were different, then I could be at peace. The ego never tells you to look within, because the moment you do, the game falls apart. This is why the ego hates introspection. It hates stillness. It hates when you stop running. Because the second you stop, even for a moment, you might realize, wait a minute, this whole thing is a scam. You don't actually need to change anything to be free. You don't need a better past. You don't need a different partner. You don't need to be more spiritual. All you need is to recognize the scam and stop playing the game. The futile search, a key that's never in the right place. Imagine coming home late at night exhausted. You reach your front door, dig into your pocket, and your keys are missing. Panic sets in. You start searching, frantically. You check your bag, your pockets, the car, the mailbox, the ground. You retrace your steps. Nothing. Then someone asks, "Did you check the door?" And there they are. The keys, already in the lock. That's God's plan for salvation. It was already there the whole time. You just didn't look where it actually was. Seek but do not find, the ego's cruel doctrine. The Course exposes the ego's prime directive, seek but do not find. Think about that. The ego wants you to seek, but it does not want you to find. That's the trick. You can seek love, but don't actually find unconditional love, because then the game is over. You can seek self-improvement, but don't actually find lasting peace, because then the ego loses control. You can seek enlightenment, but don't actually wake up, because then the dream collapses. The ego survives on your dissatisfaction, so it keeps feeding you more doors in the funhouse, more ladders to climb, more "one day I'll get there" fantasies. Just enough to keep you going, but never enough to let you arrive. Because the moment you truly arrive, the ego disappears. God's plan, a simple escape from a complex illusion. God's plan, in contrast, is simple. It says, stop looking where salvation isn't. You don't need to climb the wrong ladder faster. You don't need to search harder in the wrong places. You don't need to add complexity to something simple. You just need to look where salvation actually is, inside you, right now, already present, waiting for you to stop running long enough to notice. How do you escape? The Course gives us the answer. Only God's plan for salvation will work. There's no alternative, no substitute, no backup plan, no, well, maybe just a little of the ego's way. It's all or nothing. Because truth and illusion cannot coexist. You can't climb two ladders at once. You can't walk two paths in opposite directions. You have to choose. And the moment you choose God's plan, the ego's game collapses. The man who wouldn't open the door. A man sits in a dark room, miserable. He complains about the darkness. He resents it. He suffers in it. People tell him, just turn on the light. But he refuses. He says, no, I must figure out a way to get rid of the darkness first. Then I'll turn on the light. That's the ego's plan. God's plan. Just turn on the light and see that the darkness was never even real.